And off we go. Charles Moscowitz here. Thank you for joining me. Peter W. Sherrill. Peter is the 2020 write-in candidate for the
Yes.
presidency of the United States. Peter, you're running as a Republican. You ran it also in 2016. Let's
Yeah.
first of all start introducing yourself to the voters and asking for people's votes. But to do that, I want to hear a little bit about you, your story, your background, how you got to where you are today.
Whew. Well, I guess it's to start it off. It would be to explain after 40 years as a Democrat, I became a Republican, and that's probably the big misnomer or the mystery. And there's several reasons, but it kind of emulated from when I was in corporate and I was at Texaco Inc. and I was involved in this racial discrimination lawsuit against Texaco.
Okay.
And I became very disenfranchised with Black leadership. I watched how Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton and later on Deval Patrick, who actually was a candidate in 2020, how they totally exploited the situation when we won the lawsuit from Texaco, how they basically totally exploited the situation from that lawsuit. And they created this diversity task force, and they basically, I say extorted $35 million right off the top of the lawsuit for this bogus task force with Deval Patrick as the chair of the diversity task force that did absolutely nothing for the people of the class. And so I was infuriated by that, and which led me to write my first book. So I guess some good came out of it. I wrote a book about the Texaco racial discrimination lawsuit, kind of highlighting my dissatisfaction with the Black leadership. After I left Texaco, I ended up working in government and emergency services and Homeland Security, and city of Mount Vernon, which is in New York, a very popular city, the home of Denzel Washington and people of that nature. Actually, Dick Clark is originally from here. Art Carney. We have a list of greats, and so I was working in the government, and it was a phenomenal experience. But I couldn't believe the incompetency that I saw, and Mount Vernon is basically run by African Americans in every facet of the government, and school board, the mayor, comptroller, city council. And I was kind of excited to see what that would be like after leaving corporate America and coming in as a director of emergency services and Homeland Security.
Sure.
And I was highly disappointed in what I saw, and coming from corporate, you're used to more structure, and I saw
you know how to make things work as a corporate
Yes.
guy. That's what your background, your administration. You like to see things functioning properly, and you want to see something go from point A to point B.
Exactly. And I wasn't seeing it. And what happened, I came to realize that in government, these are one of the most important things. I realized that you can, and this is why the mayor hired that question, why would I even want to get into government? It was like, you know what? You can help people if you want to in government, because you have that authority and you have that power. And I watched how favoritism in government kind of impacted who got helped and who had to go through the bureaucracy. And it was very disheartening, because I worked with the Veterans Administration also, and I used to come there, speaking of which Memorial Day, and it wouldn't be taken care of.
Right.
Only specific ones. And so that really disturbed me about government. But I learned a lot in Homeland Security, and understand there's a whole different world that goes on in Homeland Security. There's a structure that's underneath everything that's going on in this country, keeping things safe.
Now,
for
let me just talk a little bit about that. So, you worked in Homeland Security in your home
yes.
city of Vernon, New York. Are they connected to the National Homeland Security people? And what is
Yeah,
this?
absolutely.
Okay.
I've trained in some of with first responders, police officers from all across this nation at some of the highest levels in Homeland Security. It's a phenomenal. I say this. I learned more in Homeland Security in 5 years than I did in the 25 years that I was in corporate America.
Now, you
It's
must have seen some on the inside, some thwarting of terrorist instances, and dealing with some stuff that the rest of us don't get to see.
absolutely. And I guess just to bring it to a current point, and one of the reasons why I'm so adamant about this lack of response to this pandemic, and what happens when uh, you don't take incidences, and we do the same thing with terrorism. Also, we kind of, after we mitigate it, we kind of relax and let our guards down, and you know next thing you know, they don't stop. They never stop. And so you watch these instances in Homeland Security with the things that are happening in our country right now, and it's mind-boggling. And you
Well,
know
Peter, let me ask you, what would President Peter Sherrill do if he were in the White House right now with regard to this pandemic? What sort of policy would you have, and how would you contrast that policy with either President Trump or with the Democratic Party?
well, there's a dichotomy in that, because see, the first thing is, there were reports in November about the possibility of a pandemic,
Right.
and there was brought to the administration's attention that there was something going on in China
Right.
before January. All right. So the first thing is that you would at least form a task force to deal with the worst case scenario. This is just fun. This is like basic fundamental response stuff. Knowing that there's this situation, and you have people traveling back and forth from China to America on a daily basis by the thousands. You already know that with the rate of contagion, that it's coming. It's coming. There's no question. So how do you prepare for it? And so this is where you get your Health and Human Services, your Dr. Fauci's, all the people who specialize in these areas of infectious diseases and how to respond. And you get your Homeland Security and National Security. You get all these guys together in a room, and you say, okay, worst case scenario, and then you build up from that. You do a tabletop.
Sure.
And so from that point, you would begin to decide, how do you want to disseminate this information to the people? Okay, like, this is not a hoax.
Well, let me just interject here, Peter, because my understanding is that the president did put in a ban on travel from China in, I think, mid-January, and at that time
It was at the end of January.
And at that time, the World Health Organization, which seems to be completely in the pocket of the Chinese, communist Chinese, they were saying that this was not going to be an infectious disease, that it didn't spread from person to person, which we know was untrue. And yet, when he put the travel ban in, and obviously he did not ban American citizens, because that might have been a little too much, a bridge too far, but he did cut down on, I think, 90% of travel from China. He came under
the China nationalists, just the
That's
nationalists.
right, but that's about 90% of the travel.
But
And-
that was just from China, though. But that didn't.
That's right.
Deal with,
But
that didn't deal with people coming from Europe.
Well, he also put in place checks at the airport for for temperature, and he began to put in the structure. And he was met with withering criticism from the Democrats, who said, "Oh, this is racist. You got something against Chinese people." And you had people like Nancy Pelosi going into Chinatown in February and saying, "Come on down, everything's fine. This is racism. Don't listen to what anything Trump says." And so you had the spread of the thing. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Maybe he could have been a little more vigorous about it and stood up and said, "Look, we're going to have a complete ban."
Well,
But
and that, well, see, this is why it is important to incorporate your individuals who you have in charge of these areas of response. So the reason why it was taken as racist or racism is because there's this feud with Trump and China. So it was like he targeted them.
oh,
And so,
I don't think that's why. I think it's just because the Democrats are going to call
well,
anything he does
well,
racist. I mean,
I'm no fan of I'm no fan of, and
yeah, but I
that's
mean
the beauty of it.
that's like
I'm not a fan of the
I know that,
Democrats.
but that's like a knee jerk thing. Anything he does is because he's racist, he's sexist, he's homophobic, whatever it is, and that's
But you
just the
know what?
mantra.
Yeah, but you know what? It did not, and I understand that whole dynamic right there. But what happened was, and what came from all of it, you know, when we as a person who understands what happens in pandemics, because this is what we train for. When you say it's a hoax, that was the danger.
Whoa,
Because
whoa,
see,
whoa, wait a minute, Peter. I mean, let's not take that out of context. He didn't say that the actual virus was a hoax. He said that the way the media was handling it was a hoax, in that they were trying to turn this into some kind of a attack on him and that he's a racist. And I think in that sense he was quite right. He wasn't. He tried to have. He had a meeting in the White House, a pandemic meeting, and the Democrats didn't bother to come in January because they were too busy trying to impeach him. So, I don't think that, they'll take something he says. I mean, just what you said is a good example. And they will blow that up like a big, balloon and say, look, he said this. And that's what he means by fake news, because it's not what he said. He didn't say the virus itself was a hoax.
well, but it was a nonchalant attitude. But you know what? At
Okay.
the same token, the WHO has responsibility for this, and the CDC, because uh, basically a pandemic, by definition, is when it leaves a country's border. The
Right. Becomes.
WHO sat on this for a while before they even classified it as a pandemic. By the time they classified, I don't know the exact date when they classified it, but a tremendous amount of time. I believe it had already began to spread in. It started.
Oh yeah. I mean, look, if they had been an honest agency and not completely controlled by the Chinese, we might have saved 1 million lives. I mean, if this thing had been shut down early, then it wouldn't be the pandemic it is now.
we agree on that,
Yeah.
so,
Okay.
but see, our response, and you asked how I would respond it, but see, I wouldn't rely on the World Health, and I really was disappointed in the CDC because they were like, "Oh, wear a mask, don't wear a mask," and we went back and forth with this, and it's like, it was too much uncertainty there before we got to the point where, what, we really need to social distance. There just was too many variables that came into to confusing this whole response. But see, what you have to do in these type of situations is you have to lay down the letter of the law. And so it's about how you deal with things as far as a leader. And, as I watch Ulysses S. Grant on the History Channel, keeping his composure. Of course, the Democrats are going to come at you, just like when it's vice versa. The Republicans come at the Democrats, and we going back and forth with these situations, and you see that people were dying. That was the one common denominator, regardless of WHO, CDC. We saw people were dying. Now, as far as the PPE situation in this country, that for me was very disturbing. That And what do you think about Dr. Bright's testimony to Congress, even though it was kind of partisan?
I think he was a disgruntled employee, but I think as far as the PPC goes, we learned two things. First of all, we learned that the United States isn't producing these things on its own. We ended up having to buy it from China. And
out of all places in the world to have to buy PPE.
And secondly, when the federal government went to open up the national stockpile, they found that it had been depleted under the Obama administration because the Obama administration had already used up a lot of it during the N1, swine flu epidemic, right. And they never replenished it. So look, we could point a lot of fingers of blame. Here we are, and we're still in the lockdown. I think that I want to know on a kind of a political level that President Trump has, in a sense, conducted this whole thing very conservatively. In other words, he's let the states handle it, and the federal government has acted as a partner for the states, maybe imperfectly, but nevertheless, they haven't gone in and done what a lot of liberal Democrats, including Mayor de Blasio, wants to do, which is declare a national law and have people the contract traced and sent to camps if they test positive and that kind of stuff. So I mean, I think that
that's ridiculous.
Trump, yeah, I agree, and I think Trump has been very moderate in his response, as imperfect as that is. What do you think?
You have to be very careful, and the media, how things are portrayed and how things get blown out of proportion. And sometimes you can be the reason why that they respond to you a certain type of way. The media is the media is the media. You have to make a decision, stay with it, stand by it, and let the chips fall where they may. But if you know that you've done everything in your power to mitigate any situation, because like if this was a terrorist situation and it was like a chemical, and who knows the dynamic as far as like if this was a chemical or biological attack, we would have been totally destroyed. And that's the concern. Now, the other part is, yes, they say the stockpile was depleted, but there also was a exercise in 2018, I believe.
Right.
And so, but you know what? I will say this, like Dr. Bright said, that there has been this shortage of PPE in this country since like 2008. And for me, I'm like saying, you must at minimum always be prepared. And so this situation has been going on and ongoing, and it has really devastated us economically at the end of the day. We've paid a tremendous price for this at the end of the day.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's the part that could have been precipitated if we just would have said, you know what, and I know it would have been a hard pill, but looking and there's ways to present information. All you do kind of is like, given the situation in China with the amount of deaths that are occurring and it's spreading, we might have to seriously look at locking down. You got to prepare them. You just don't give them, the whole pill. You're like, we have to, in January, you could say, you know what, we have to really seriously think about possibly closing down for the incubation period that has been come to known for this coronavirus.
But look at the devastation it's wrecking on small businesses and people. It's plus the amount of debt that it's causing. $3 trillion in spending for emergency unemployment supplements. It's going to take us. It could take up to 10 years to dig out of this thing. I mean, you're an economist. You know something about this.
Yes, I do, and I tell you, I'm very concerned about the small businesses, and I'm very concerned about that initial stimulus that came out that the small businesses were not able to access. I think that is the part that has fueled this uprising to open, because they have no source of income or livelihood, because this money that was designated for them kind of ended up, well, look, the Los Angeles Lakers ended up with money. How did the Los Angeles Lakers?
Oh, I know. Yeah, that's crazy. Of course.
That's crazy. And so the time that it took to redevelop another spending bill and to reallocate another, what, 400 and some odd billion dollars, almost a half $1 trillion. By the time it took to get that deal done, the damage was done. And so that's why you have people out there saying, open up. We gotta open up. And so what do you do? What do you do? But I believe that if they would have got the stimulus that was initially designated for them, it would have gave them an extra couple of weeks to weather this thing and watch the numbers come down and watch the curve come down and watch this thing flatten. And so,
well, you touch upon an issue that really transcends just the pandemic, and that is government corruption. Whenever you have a program that involves big money like this, you're going to have people siphoning off the money, and that's, and misdirecting it, and you're going to have special interests, especially in Congress, putting in little clauses into a bill that, that sends a few bucks in different directions. I mean, this is a big, big institutional question. It's something that's never going to be completely resolved because people are always going to be corrupt. But the question is, how do you rein it in? How do you at least bring some level of accountability so that we can maybe get some relief on that?
Well, herein lies the problem, Charles. As long as it's going to take $1 billion to run a presidential campaign and hundreds of $1 million to run for Senate and to run for Congress to get elected, you're always going to have to go to those entities that have that type of money.
And you're going to sell out to them to a certain extent.
You basically have to, and because in order to get elected, and these are, and that's the interesting part, because the salary of these positions is nowhere near the money that's being invested. So that tells you that you are fueling another alternate economy or special benefits for a certain select group of individuals.
Either that, or there are two other alternatives to that. The first one is the Michael Bloomberg alternative: just write a check for $100 million out of his bank account. And the second one is Donald Trump. He ran the whole thing on a shoestring, but he had
that's not exactly.
Well, wait. He had name recognition. He had media savvy. He was a TV star already, and the media liked him because he brought in ratings, so they couldn't get enough of him. So he didn't
He didn't
need to spend any money, and he didn't. I mean, Hillary Clinton spent hundreds of millions of dollars. So did Barack Obama. But Trump was able to do it on, he bought a few Facebook ads, basically.
There's a little bit more to it than that. There's a little bit more to it.
Well,
actually, I recently wrote a book called "The Life of a Black Republican in Trump's America."
Great.
That's an interesting story because it deals with.
Speaking, if I may, of black Republicans, Herman Cain ran a pretty good campaign, and he was essentially undone by the liberal left, and same thing with Ben Carson, who has turned out to be a great housing and urban development secretary. So, President Trump has been, in a certain broad sense, not literally, but I would argue, America's first black president.
I don't know about that, but
well, what I mean is that he's really taken an issue of creating more opportunity for people, reducing poverty, improving the family, getting rid of these horrible laws that go back to Clinton, which put innocent people in prison. He signed, a lot of things, and I think there's going to be more of that. And I think his record on that's pretty good.
Well, I
It's better than Barack Obama's.
well see, and I get that all the time, but I was not a fan. I was not a fan. Although I did in 2000
Nine, 8, 2008. You voted for him.
I voted for him.
Sure.
2011 I left the party.
Even though you call yourself the Black McCain.
Yes. I love John. I love John. You saw
Okay.
that. Huh? I love John McCain. I
Understood.
love John McCain. I love John McCain. I think he's a great individual.
Right.
Uh, the Maverick. I think the party misses him.
Well, I mean, look, you're going up against President Trump, and I think it's very interesting. And you're running as a write-in candidate because the
Yes.
Republicans have undone. They're not bothering with primaries because they've got an incumbent. Now,
Right.
if you've never held office before outside of your hometown of Vernon, and
Mount Vernon.
but yet I think that what you're doing is good for the Republican Party, and it's probably good for you, and it's you very well could bring in, frankly, black votes to the Republican Party, which is a traditional party of African Americans going all the way back to Lincoln's
Well, I've
time.
been trying to, bring that to the forefront. I reference it is, and that's the interesting part is that it was when I was led to do this, partly out of just total dissatisfaction, but then there was and I'll tell you an interesting story. Dissatisfaction, but it was more divinely, spiritually orchestrated. The parts, as I kind of developed, when you reach a certain age and you realize that you really have crossed to the other side of the sand running through the hourglass.
I know that age.
Yeah, and so you start taking things a little bit more serious, and I realized that what I was lining up, how I was lining up, and what I was doing did not line up with the Democratic Party.
Okay.
All right, but what the interesting part was that I got introduced to the Tea Party, Westchester County Tea Party,
Sure.
and let me tell you, they became some of my dearest friends, and I would share with them how, first of all, alienated I became in my hometown as majority Democrat, majority African American. I became alienated. But, it was interesting when I shared with them how I was divinely and spiritually led to join the Republican Party, they understood it. I mean, they actually really, truly understood it. I mean, when I would share with them, I mean, you could see the
amazing.
tears coming down their eyes and just be like, it was like we became like united. But the irony of it is that when I would try to tell my own people that, they'd be like, why are you joining the Republican Party? I was like, this is more spiritual than political. They would look at me like I had lost my mind. And it was like, this is interesting that I can share this with the Tea Party, but when I share it with my people, it's an entirely different response.
Well, you know what it is. I mean, you're dealing with the same thing that I suppose you could say that I deal with as a Jew. The establishment, the black establishment, the Jewish establishment, they're really hardcore, Democratic Party going way back. In the case of Jews, I think it goes back to Franklin Roosevelt.
Okay.
And it's almost a tribal thing. It's like, this is what we do. This is who we are. We don't question it. And it's so it's kind of, you're up against a really almost a tradition with that. I mean, people just don't think outside of course they support the Democrats, and they believe a lot of the rhetoric the Democrats spew about, we're going to help minorities, which is nonsense. And that the other guys don't like you, which is also nonsense, or it might be a little true, but it's not quite the way they portray it. And yet here you are breaking with that tradition, as have I in my own. And I think it's very encouraging. I hope that what happens, because you're a relatively young man and you've not held high office yet. So frankly, with due respect, I don't think you're quite going to be in the White House next year. However, you may, down the road, a couple of more election cycles, and you could be if you play it right. And I think that by raising awareness among the black community, among the conservative community, among people in New York, you could become a player in the next Trump administration, and you could bring a constituency that would be of value, and to the administration, and then really set yourself up with an important a role to play that could then lead you to the presidency in due time. What do you think?
Well, how much time do you think I have?
Well, I don't know how old you are. You look like you're younger than me, but I don't know.
I've already passed the 60 mark, and
Okay.
yeah, I'm like 62, going on 63, but yeah.
You're my age.
But somehow, and I do understand everything that you're saying. The rationale, logistically, makes total sense. But you know what? There is a divide in this country, and somebody has to bridge this divide. There's a polarization, and I believe that I am the one who can do this. Because see, at the end of the day, I know it would probably be harder to convince those in our current party to actually not vote for Trump, the incumbent. However, I do believe that there is a certain percentage that will look at what we're talking about and that whole concept of that write-in vote back down to that initial to the foundation of how this nation was formed.
Oh, and it's amazing.
Yeah. When you think of and when I decided to like pursue this path, there was this incredible sense of freedom and democracy, and it just like, this is it. And this is like the driving force, and it's like, you know what? Nope, you can't buy this, and you can't buy this. This is what the founding fathers intended for this nation. And it's like, you know what? He has a point. No special interest. Only we the people. And it's just like, it's so beautiful. It's just so beautiful.
I totally get it. I ran for office myself, and I had a very similar experience. It's very exalting, and it's a great exercise. I urge people to run. It's sort of, even if you don't make it, you still get heard. You get a couple of points across the plate. You make a difference. You bring up awareness. They have to pay a little attention, and you can get things done.
Exactly,
Peter.
And it's about the people, and the people are hurting. And like you said, it's going to take probably 10 years to dig out of this catastrophic decimation.
Well, it
of
might.
our economy.
The longer it goes on, we might just bounce back sooner. I mean, I think the people are ready to roll. But Peter, are you going to be a write-in candidate right up to the bitter end, or are you?
I'm going to be up to the bitter end, as far as I can see.
So
yeah, who's that? We have just begun to fight.
Well, John Paul Jones.
Paul Jones. We have just begun to fight.
But Peter, if Donald Trump becomes the nominee in September, you're not going to endorse him. You're going to continue to go through November.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I'm going all the way. I am going all the way, because you know what? To not do it would be a disservice to what the founding fathers intended for this country. And I am standing on that platform, and I'm not moving forward.
I'm glad to hear that. I would just ask you, as a matter of pragmatism, and America is famous for its pragmatism, let's face it. It is one of our greatest exports, is that in the last week of October, if you don't think you're going to win, and you really don't see this happening, would you consider at that point asking your supporters to vote for Donald Trump? Or maybe that's too far in the future. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be too far in the future, and I would have to really hear, that I have a problem with that alt-right
What do you
association.
mean? What alt-right association? Who's alt-right?
Oh, come on, Mark. Come on,
Well,
Charles.
tell me, Peter.
Oh,
Tell me what you're talking about. What do you
okay.
mean alt-right?
Alt-right. Come on. You don't know that there's an alt-right and
Well, I want to
and-
hear from you. I want to know what you
and
mean
the, and
by
the K. Okay.
that. No, well, you think the KKK is backing Trump? I mean, is that what you're
Yeah.
saying?
See,
Oh,
I
come
have
on.
a problem.
No,
I have a problem.
That's
know what?
very
For me,
that's very unfair.
for me, that's really that's
Yeah, but that doesn't mean. Look at the Communist Party backed Hillary. They put her on the front page of their.
Oh,
weekly,
I would.
that
just
doesn't
between
make
me
her
and
a
you,
communist.
I was totally against Hillary's.
Yeah, but the point I'm making here is that doesn't make her a communist. Because she's endorsed by the Communist Party, and I don't even know if the KKK would vote for Trump. They're Democrats. It's a radical Democrat group that goes way back.
I think they have migrated from the Democratic Party. There might be a remnant
you can't
in the
blame
Democratic Party.
Republicans and Trump for that. They're not catering to the KKK. Come on, please.
Well, I'll put it like this: his sole financier in 2016 is definitely alt-right Steve Bannon, Breitbart, and the whole 9 yards.
And Steve Bannon does not cater to the KKK either. I mean, he's not anti-black, or he's not a white supremacist. You believe that? That's a lot of garbage. Come on, Peter. I expect better from you. That's propaganda coming from Trump's enemies.
Let me tell you something. Steve Bannon is a very, and Breitbart and that whole
they're not racist, Peter. Look into it for yourself. You're listening. I have too. You're listening. I wouldn't have. I mean, I think that I've never seen them being racist. It's just not true. I mean, that's just propaganda. That's the stuff that you hear from.
Maybe I'm just a little bit sensitive to it because of my experience.
I understand that. Look, I heard they were anti-Semitic.
Of what I went through at Texaco. Even though I was disenfranchised with black leadership, with Jesse and Al and Deval Patrick, how they handled, how they capitalized off of that whole settlement.
Peter, let me be clear. I'm not saying that there's not racism in this country and that you don't have, big corporations involved with racist policies. I think that happens all the time, and you know that. I mean, you've experienced it.
Yeah,
but let's not. But yeah, and I respect that fact, and I think it's an issue. But let's not point fingers of blame at Trump for that, and as opposed to the Democrats. I think that he's
not as opposed to, because see, one of the things that I say in the book that I've written called Exodus, why I became a Republican, is that you will find that, and there was this whole thing that the Republican Party is racist, and one of my arguments is if they are not or not more than the Democrats.
I would argue that they're less than the Democrats because
that's what my argument was too. Because what I did was I took the time out and because I had preconceived notions about the Tea Party. Okay. And so when a friend of mine invited me to a meeting because I basically ripped them in my book Exodus, and she was like, "We're not like that," and I'm like, "Well, all right." She's like, "You should come to one of our meetings." I'm like, "Okay, I will." Right. So I went to one of their meetings. After I left that meeting, I was like, you know what? These are some of the most integral, politically astute. I learned a lot from them.
Good for you.
And I was in grad school at the time too. And some of the most politically astute people I've ever encountered in my life. And it was like, if I could take what they have and give it to us, my people, so they don't keep hope alive and nothing happens. Let me tell you something. You go to speak to them, you better know every bill that's impacting them. Because if you do not, they will shred. It's not about black, white. Oh, you think you're just going in there because you white and they the Tea Party and they just going to be like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's the total opposite. They ask the tough, real questions. And I had to step back and take a look, and I was like, wow, this is fascinating. My preconceived thoughts about the